For 7 years, Shuntaro Furukawa has been the president of Nintendo. He has personally announced Switch 2 news. He is the main voice liaising with investors at regular presentations, and his face has become well known in the Nintendo YouTube space. And yet, despite this, he has a reputation as being a bit of an enigma. People have drawn inferences from his background, from his words, but what is really known about the man himself? In this video, I want to explore everything we know about Nintendo's president, so settle in for a Nintendo Forecast deep dive on Shuntaro Furukawa. Furukawa was born on the 10th of January 1972 in Tokyo, and even as a child, he was in a prestigious family. His father is Taku Furukawa, a Japanese illustrator, cinematographer, and director of some renown, and recipient of the Medal with Purple Ribbon, a medal awarded by the Japanese Emperor for outstanding merit in the fields of academia or the arts. The older Furukawa had just founded his own animation studio, Takun Manga Box, 2 years prior to the birth of his son, and appears to have travelled widely across the world in connection to his work. Still, the young Shuntaro appears to have had a relatively normal early life. He went to school in Tokyo, and like many children, he looked forward to New Year money from his parents. A Japanese custom, otoshidama, is the celebratory money given to children during the New Year's holiday, typically by parents, grandparents, relatives, or family friends. It is a way of wishing good fortune and prosperity in the coming year. And when Shuntaro Furukawa was in middle school, he was able to use this money to buy a Nintendo Famicom. The Famicom had been out for at least a year by this point and didn't really have much in the way of competition in Japan. But rather than being placed in the living room, the Famicom was placed instead in the Furukawa's Japanese room, a traditional room with tatami flooring and often used for tea ceremonies and other events in Japanese homes. As he recalled in a Japanese television interview, it was connected to a place a little far away, like a game center. Still, Furukawa-san continued to follow video games, upgrading to a Super Nintendo in due course. That said, he was not a particular devotee of Nintendo products. As he recalls, I was mostly interested in games from other companies, like Nobunaga's Ambition and baseball games like Super Batter Up. I didn't really play many Nintendo games. Graduating from Kunitachi Senior High School in 1990, he chose a rather different path from his artistic father and instead joined Waseda University's School of Political Science and Economics. Founded in the late 19th century while education in Japan was under the strong influence of the German education system, which Japan considered the gold standard at the time, the School of Political Science and Economics took a different and, at that time, disruptive track. They united the study of political science and the study of economics into a single school, with students in each of the two departments encouraged to study the other discipline also. This insightful decision was remarkable because German universities generally placed political science with law and not economics. The innovation thrived and has continued to this day, giving students a strong grounding in economics and politics both. Waseda University also has a very strong language program and, unlike many Japanese universities, had a very strong tradition of different languages with bilingual courses as well as courses about the language and culture of many different countries. Furukawa-san's facility with languages would prove to be consequential, but perhaps not as consequential as a chance meeting at a tennis club. He recounted, "One day a younger student at my tennis club told me, 'You have to play this. It's a complete waste that you're not playing it.' The game he was recommended was 1992's Super Mario Kart. It was the first time I had played a Nintendo game in a while, and it was so much fun," Furukawa recounted. "I remember feeling that I guess this company is making great things after all." He also reflected, "If I hadn't played Mario Kart at that time, I may have led a very different life." This was Furukawa-san's third year of his 4-year course, and inevitably his mind had turned towards life after graduation. Still, he reflected that it was actually a complete coincidence that I took the Nintendo employment entrance test. I requested an apprenticeship through the application forms that I would sometimes see in job-seeking magazines. And sure enough, upon graduating in 1994, he entered Nintendo's graduate program. The details of the process back in 1994 we can't be sure about, but in 2007 they had a fairly well-entrenched system with 3 different interviews and a formal examination, including questions linked to, as they explained, common sense, professional exams, and aptitude tests. As they said in their 2007 Q&A, we will make a comprehensive judgment of aptitude, major, wishes, company situation, etc., and decide after training for new employees. Therefore, in some cases, it may differ from the person's wishes. Still, Furukawa-san would have entered not for engineering, design, or sound, but rather for the office positions, which would have likely seen him work a significant amount of time in Tokyo. It was also expected that people would spend 2 or 3 years in general positions before specializing, but when an opportunity came up in Groß-Ostheim, Germany, he seized it. This was a position linked to accountancy in Nintendo Europe under the leadership of Satoru Shibata. It was to be a major part of Furukawa-san's career, nearly 11 years, and a period that saw huge changes in Nintendo's European operation. These included major launches such as 1997's launch of the Nintendo 64 and 1999's launch of the Pokémon series in Europe, as well as internal changes such as the creation in 2000 of Nintendo Benelux, with the old Nintendo Netherlands group taking control of sales in Belgium as well, plus the opening of offices in Slough in the UK in 2001. The same year, incidentally, David Brent put Slough office culture on the map in the original UK version of The Office. They also had a new department in Milan in 2002. It may have been a time of some success for Nintendo, but one business practice was going to lead to huge consequences. Nintendo at the time was alleged to be running what the European Union's primary executive arm, the European Commission, asserted to be a price-fixing cartel. This price-fixing behaviour seemingly prevented the relatively cheap UK products being freely exported into the rest of the European markets, with the effect that prices in many European countries could be kept artificially high. The Commission concluded that companies which offered imported products from other companies were boycotted by Nintendo or suffered reductions in their supply, meaning that, in effect, they had to source Nintendo products from Nintendo's more expensive regional suppliers. This practice ran between 1991 and 1998, whereupon Nintendo changed its practices and cooperated fully with the European investigation. A Brussels statement said that the fines that were to follow would have been significantly higher if not for this cooperation, but nevertheless, when the European Commission published its judgment, it confirmed that they were fining Nintendo 149 million euros, which was around 220 million US dollars, with further fines for many of their regional distributors. Nintendo said that they found this to be unjustly high. Eventually, in 2009, it was concluded that Nintendo should have a 40% reduction in this fine because they had in fact collaborated from a very early point. Now, while we don't know whether Shuntaro Furukawa was directly involved in all this, we do know that his long stint in Germany overlapped significantly with this ongoing dispute, and that Furukawa was a fluent English speaker, which, combined with his native Japanese language and doubtless his growing facility with German as he lived in the country for so long, probably proved valuable. Having said that, it is likely that it wasn't all stress, as Shuntaro's father Taku has blogged about multiple trips for Europe over this period, including a games festival in Rome where they were first releasing Wii controllers and everybody got to use them. With his father now frequently globetrotting for work, it seems likely that there would have been an opportunity for the senior Furukawa to see their up-and-coming son that much more often. But there were other mentors who were to define Shuntaro Furukawa's future. In 2002, Nintendo's longtime president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, retired, and for the first time in its more than 100-year history, the company was not to be run by one of the Yamauchi family. Shuntaro Furukawa never spoke directly with Yamauchi-san in the 8 years they worked together, although perhaps this is not surprising since most of that time he was living a third of the way around the world. However, he would be a lot closer with the new president, Satoru Iwata. Furukawa later recalled, "I had many opportunities to work with Mr. Iwata when I was assigned overseas and learned a lot by consulting with him and getting guidance from abroad." However, he noted that the philosophy of Yamauchi was not lost, mentioning, "I've heard all about Yamauchi's philosophy from Iwata and his successor, Mr. Kimishima. At management policy briefings, I'd say, entertainment is valuable because it's different to other things we do in life, but these are Yamauchi's words. He laid out a universal way of thinking for us, which is the foundation of the current Nintendo. Mr. Iwata took over that and left a lot of people in the company who could take initiative and think for themselves." And as Furukawa returned from his long stint in Europe, the two became increasingly inseparable. Kit and Krista have related that Iwata often travelled around the world, and frequently in these meetings he would have other people in tow, notably Shuntaro Furukawa. Kit Ellis said, "So often Shuntaro Furukawa was travelling with him as part of his party, and he was sitting in on every one of Mr. Iwata's meetings, and a lot of the time he was just sort of a silent observer, and we came to understand that he was an up-and-comer on the business side, and someone that Mr. Iwata had sort of a long-term vision for, that he saw the potential for him as a leader." Still, such considerations were likely to be a long way off. Until Iwata's shock diagnosis in 2014, the prospect of the company needing a successor seemed a remote one. Only in his mid-50s at that point, Iwata was still younger than the average Japanese company president, and Furukawa has refused to be drawn on Iwata's specific influence on him, saying, "I learnt all sorts of things from Mr. Iwata, but it's best I refrain from mentioning specifics. He didn't like the fact that there are people still at Nintendo who say, 'I learnt this from Mr. Iwata.' We're confident that Iwata himself wouldn't approve of that, so that's why we keep that close to our hearts." Nevertheless, it seems that Furukawa returned to Japan by 2009 when Masahiro Sakurai was gearing up to work on Kid Icarus Uprising. His company Sora Limited didn't have the capacity to mount a project of its own, and so he set up a new company with Nintendo called Project Sora. Nintendo owned 72% and Sora Limited owned 28%. The company closed down after a few years, but credited as its auditor, and the figure looking after Nintendo's side of the investment was none other than Shuntaro Furukawa. When Project Sora shut its doors, Shuntaro Furukawa picked up an even more prestigious and important outside directorship, the Pokemon Company. This is a real indicator that by this point in the mid-2010s, when Furukawa was reportedly working on the global marketing department, he was seen as an important figure in Nintendo's future. But the real push into the spotlight came in 2015. Everyone was looking at the sad death of Satoru Iwata and the appointment of first Genya Takeda and Shigeru Miyamoto as caretaker leaders, and then Tatsumi Kimishima as a transitional president for Nintendo. That 2015 reshuffle really set the company on its path it's on today, with Shinya Takahashi put in charge of the development group as well. But perhaps an even more telling appointment was Shuntaro Furukawa as the head of the corporate planning team. Satoru Iwata and Tatsumi Kimishima had both also spent time in the corporate planning team before ascending to the presidency. Many have speculated that this makes Furukawa the hand-picked heir of Iwata, but I can't find any definitive proof of this, though it would make sense that Iwata would have left suggestions that would shape the 2015 reconfiguration of the company. While previously Kimishima ran through the numbers at investor conferences and Iwata would frequently take the questions, now Kimishima was in Iwata's role and Furukawa was talking through the numbers. It seems that Furukawa's mentorship for the top job was started in earnest at this time. It should be observed that the importance in this dynamic of others, and particularly of Shinya Takahashi, should not be underestimated. Furukawa would later note that he very much keeps to his lane, which is not software, and that the group leadership approach Iwata initiated has facilitated this. He said, We are still talking through the group leadership that we introduced after Mr. Yamauchi retired. There are both hardware developers and software developers in the management team, so I don't do development at all. I simply enjoy the games and leave it to the people in charge to judge whether it's good or bad. The core principles behind our finances are to ensure the company continues. I've been in the game console business for over 30 years, and with good times also comes the bad. As the times change, our management will need to make level-headed decisions, changing what needs to be changed in the company. Tatsumi Kimishima made his own observations about Furukawa's appointment and how it compared to the appointment of Iwata so many years prior. He said, "I have my own thinking about why Mr. Yamauchi talked about being unusual when he named Mr. Iwata as the president. Mr. Yamauchi worked for more than 50 years in the game business and he stubbornly stuck to his beliefs. He always felt that software is key to the game business and that creating the software naturally takes time and labor as well as money, and that you have to go all out and never quit. He also always felt that the purpose of the hardware is to bring out the best of the software, and he never changed his thinking on this. I imagine he would say that a person who would readily bend Nintendo's core attitudes would be unfit for the job. In a sense, he was calling for a stubborn person, or as he might say, a thoroughly unusual person. My understanding is that he used that word to mean someone who would not change no matter what other people or what other companies said, and would want to preserve any aspect that makes Nintendo different from the others. As to whether Mr. Furukawa is in any way unusual, I can just say he has extremely strong inner fortitude. He has clear and articulated opinions. He understands the Nintendo point of view, and he can express that to everyone in his own words. The corporate planning department, headed by Mr. Furukawa, has the important mission of conveying the Nintendo point of view to all employees, including people involved in development and sales, as well as people in other countries. It is important that the department remain on point no matter where the conversation leads, and he has been extremely competent at that. Still, while he could be stubborn and articulate, his eventual elevation to the company president was received broadly positively. Fortune reported at the time that Atul Goyam, an analyst at Jefferies Group who met him several times in person, said that Furukawa comes across as thoughtful, very knowledgeable, and quite well informed. He is fluent in English. He may be the perfect person to fill the communications gap that exists between Nintendo and investors. He also took pains to settle nerves for staff. As Krista Yang recalled, the other thing about Mr. Furukawa that's really fun is that he came to our offices when he became the global president to introduce himself, for us to get to know him, and I love how it was sort of the first time we were seeing his personality and getting to know who he is as a person. At the time, he was telling us how he was a huge Fire Emblem fan, and he was playing Fire Emblem, and he was like, "I'm a huge fan, I've been playing Fire Emblem," but then I got to the end of Fire Emblem, and I was like, the credits were rolling, and it got to the very end, and it was like, executive producer Furukawa, and he was like, that was a hard, cold reality that I had to get back to work. Hard work is clearly not a problem, though, for Furukawa, as Kimishima reported that the man had spent 2 years building a plan for Nintendo before stepping into the role as president. Still, over the years he's also shared a few lighter anecdotes, such as his enjoyment of Golf Story on the Switch, and he and Tatsumi Kimishima were snapped when he took over in 2018 using the Joy-Con for a round of Mario Tennis Aces. After all, it was a chance tennis encounter that led him to Mario Kart and to Nintendo, so perhaps this was the most appropriate way to celebrate of all. If you enjoyed this deep dive, why not check out my video on another major figure, Yoshiaki Koizumi. If the video is done, it'll be on screen, and if not, hit subscribe because this is one you will not want to miss. Please do like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.